If you ask me, the right-to-market movement is the single most destructive ideology in modern fantasy. It masquerades as savvy business acumen, but what it actually promotes is a form of creative application. Now, with a master's degree in history, I obviously know that we always learn from the past, at least under ideal circumstances. But sacrificing the stories in your heart on the altar of market trends and quick bucks is nothing but creative cowardice. So, if you're just looking for tips on how to pick the next trendy trope, click away now because this video isn't for you. We are here to diagnose a sickness in the craft and to understand why so many of our modern fantasy stories feel so incredibly lifeless. The sickness, I believe, has its roots in a fundamental schism within the very philosophy of creation. What we are witnessing is not a decline in talent, but a war for the soul of the story itself. This conflict pits two diametrically opposed models of narrative against one another. On one side, we have the story as artifact. Imagine for a moment a master smith forging a single named sword. Every fold of the steel, every detail of the hilt is imbued with purpose, designed to serve a singular function and express a unique vision. This sword is irreplaceable, built to resonate with its wielder on a level beyond mere utility. An artifact in narrative terms is precisely this, a purpose-built vessel for a specific human truth. Its creation begins with a haunting question, a profound emotional ache, or a deeply held conviction about the world. The author, like that smith, architects every element, plot, characters, magic system, to serve and explore that central driving purpose. We recognize these stories because they leave a permanent mark on our psyche. They are the books that challenge our assumptions, that linger in our thoughts for years, or that articulate some ineffable part of our own experience. An artifact's primary function is to create meaning. Opposing this then stands the philosophy of the story as product. In this case, consider not a master smith but a modern factory floor producing thousands of identical knives. This factory does not begin with an artistic vision. It begins with market analysis. Data on blade length, handle ergonomics, popular color schemes, and price points. Its goal is not to create a singular resonant object, but to efficiently manufacture a commodity that meets existing consumer demand with minimal friction. The product is designed for consumption, optimized for replicability, and engineered to be familiar. This approach identifies popular tropes, subgenres, and cover art styles, then reverse engineers a narrative to fit those profitable data points. The primary function of the product is to generate a transaction, and herein lies the essential battlefield. Now, this is not a judgment on commercial success, as many artifacts become bestsellers and many products fail to find an audience. Instead, it is a diagnosis of intent. My argument is that the creeping sense of hollowness many of us feel in modern fantasy is a direct result of the product philosophy gaining dominance. We are surrounded by a sea of competently assembled, perfectly markable, and yet profoundly forgettable commodities. These stories are the narrative equivalent of fast food. They are easy to consume, they momentarily satisfy a craving, but they offer no lasting nourishment. Now, this is the point where many discussions about the genre's health go astray. Many commentators, critics, and writers correctly identify the symptoms of this sickness. They point their fingers at a handful of convenient scapegoats, believing they have found the source of the infection. But what appears to be a series of distinct problems is, in fact, the manifold presentation of a single underlying disease. So let me show you some of these false narratives, these misdiagnoses, because understanding what the problem is not is crucial to correctly identify what it is. And the most common target is the explosion of self-publishing. Critics will often lament the so-called slush pile being made public, claiming that the lack of traditional gatekeepers has flooded the market with amateurish work. They argue that this deluge of content makes it impossible for quality to rise to the top. This analysis, however, mistakes the delivery system for the disease. Self-publishing is not an ideology, it's a technology, a tool for distribution. It is an agnostic platform that gives the storyteller unprecedented freedom to bring their vision directly to readers, yes. But that very freedom, of course, can be used to create either an artifact or a product. Indeed, the direct line to market data that platforms like Amazon provide can incentivize a product-based mindset even. Writers can see in real time which keywords are trending and which cover styles are converting, making the temptation to engineer a story for the algorithm immense. But the platform itself is not the source of that temptation. Blaming self-publishing for the rise of formulaic stories is like blaming the printing press for the existence of bad novels. The tool simply reveals the intent of the person who wields it. Another frequent culprit identified then is the rise of specific mechanics-heavy subgenres like lit RPG and progression fantasy. The argument here is that the focus on quantifiable power-ups, stat sheets, and game-like systems strips away fantasy of its mystery and literary depth. Stories, these critics claim, are being reduced to a series of numerical gains where character development is replaced by leveling up. But again, this is a classic case of confusing the symptom with the sickness. A story's quality is not determined by its genre conventions, but by how these conventions are used. There's nothing inherently artless about a system of progression. One could easily architect a powerful, character-driven story using these very mechanics. Imagine a lit RPG where a character's obsession with their stat sheet becomes a metaphor for a crippling need for external validation. A journey that forces them to learn that their true worth cannot be measured by a number. The problem is not the existence of a health bar in the narrative. The sickness occurs when that health bar becomes the point of the narrative. When the formula of the subgenre is used as a template to be filled, rather than a set of tools to be used in service of a deeper thematic promise. That result is inevitably hollow. But with that said, the most sophisticated misdiagnosis targets the algorithm themselves. Commentators point to the recommendation engines of Amazon, Audible, and Goodreads as the true villains. They contend that these complex systems create feedback loops promoting books that are similar to what is already popular. This process, they argue, systematically punishes originality and rewards conformity, creating a monoculture where only the most formulaic stories can thrive. But yet again, this grants far too much agency to the machine. An algorithm is a mirror, not a creator. It reflects and amplifies the existing behavior of its users. It cannot force a writer to abandon a unique vision, nor can it compel a reader to purchase a book they find unappealing. What this system truly does is weaponize the product philosophy though. It provides a clear data-driven roadmap for writers whose primary goal is to replicate existing success. So the true antagonist is not the code that analyzes reader behavior. It is the ideology that tells a writer their most sacred task is to conform to that behavior. The real overall sickness is the deliberate, calculated choice to build a product instead of forging an artifact. Now, to unearth the origins of this sickness, we must become historical detectives, tracing its lineage back through the decades. What appears to be a distinctly digital age phenomenon, this algorithmic, market-driven approach to creation, is in fact the ideological descendant of a far older analog machine. The philosophy of the story as product was not born in a server farm in Silicon Valley. It was perfected in a paper-strewn office in the early 20th century during the explosive boom of pulp fiction. It's here where we find the genesis of the factory model, and at its heart, an organizational genius named Edward Stratemeyer. Stratemeyer was, for all intent and purposes, the Henry Ford of juvenile literature. He recognized a burgeoning insatiable market for adventure stories and devised a system to meet that demand with unprecedented efficiency. This system was the Stratemeyer Syndicate, and it was nothing short of a fiction factory. This method was both revolutionary and, from an artistic standpoint, deeply unsettling. Because you see, Stratemeyer himself would not write the books. Instead, he became the master architect of the production line. He would make up a new series, like a charismatic boy detective or adventurous aviators, and then create a detailed multi-page outline for each individual novel. With this formula in hand, he then outsourced the actual prose to a stable of ghostwriters. These writers were paid a flat fee, typically around $100 per book, and were required to sign a contract relinquishing all rights and claims to authorship. They were in essence assembly line workers, tasked with adding the flesh of prose to the prefabricated skeleton that Stratemeyer had provided. The goal was never literary artistry, it was volume, consistency, and speed. This system allowed the syndicate to churn out hundreds of books under various house pseudonyms. Names like Franklin W. Dixon, the supposed author of The Hardy Boys, or Carolyn Keene, the celebrated creator of Nancy Drew, were not real people. They were brand names, trademarks stamped onto a mass-produced good to ensure consumer recognition and loyalty. The profound innovation of the Stratemeyer Syndicate was the deliberate removal of the individual authorial vision from the heart of the creative process. Here, the system was king. The story was no longer an artifact forged from a single person's unique experience and worldview. It had become a product, engineered from a proven formula and assembled by interchangeable labor. This industrial paradigm, this focus on replicable templates over singular inspiration, is the direct ancestor of the sickness we face today. So therefore, the true antagonist of our story here is not a person, a corporation, or a piece of software. It is the inheritor of Edward Stratemeyer's ghost. It is the modern, digitized, and far more insidious perfection of his factory model. This antagonist is an ideology, a pervasive philosophy that whispers in the ear of every aspiring writer. It's the doctrine of right to market. What this doctrine does is that it takes Stratemeyer's core concept and supercharges it with the immense power of data analytics. It no longer relies on one man's intuition about what children might want to read. Instead, it scrapes, analyzes, and quantifies the behavior of millions of online readers to build its formulas. This is Stratemeyer's assembly line, rebuilt for the digital age. So the essential soul-level question is no longer what story must I tell, it becomes what story is the market currently buying. And that is the unmasked villain, a system that treats art as a science of replication. Now, the wreckage of this philosophy litters our cultural landscape. When a story is built from the outside in, engineered from market data instead of forged from a central human truth, it carries the seeds of its own collapse. Because its structural integrity is a mirage. We can see the evidence by analyzing some of the spectacular failures of stories built this way. And these are not small independent projects that lack resources. Consider the Divergent series of novels and films. For those unfamiliar, the story is set in a post-apocalyptic Chicago where society had been reorganized into 5 factions, each dedicated to a single human virtue. At a certain age, every citizen must choose the faction they belong to for the rest of their lives. This premise is a masterclass in market-driven design. It was created to capture the lucrative young adult dystopian audience that had made The Hunger Games a global phenomenon. The faction system itself is an irresistible marketing hook, a built-in personality quiz that invites the readers to ask, which one would I be? It is a brilliant piece of commercial engineering. Sociologically, however, it is an absurdity. The entire world collapses the moment you apply the slightest pressure. Why would any functioning society choose to segregate its population based on a single isolated personality trait? How would a community composed entirely of the brave, with no one dedicated to intelligence or selflessness, possibly sustain itself without descending into violent chaos? Real human beings are a complex amalgam of these very traits. So this world isn't a society, it's a high-concept gimmick. The failure is architectural because the world building was not designed to explore a profound truth about identity or social control. Its purpose was to facilitate a market segmentation mechanic. Because the foundation is a marketing pitch. The entire narrative built upon it, which spans the love story, rebellion, even the war, feels flimsy and preordained, its logic constantly bending to serve a premise that was never meant to be examined too closely. And this is not an isolated case. Because next we can look at a more recent example. Netflix's ambitious space opera Rebel Moon. Here, the premise involves a mysterious former soldier gathering a band of disparate warriors from across the galaxy to protect a peaceful farming village from the clutches of a tyrannical interstellar empire. This film is a perfect specimen of product-based creation, assembled from a dataset labeled epic sci-fi fantasy. It meticulously checks every box. You have the visual aesthetic of a grittier Star Wars. You have the director Zack Snyder's signature slow-motion action sequences. You have the classic gathering the team trope straight out of the Magnificent Seven. Every component is a proven commodity, an element that has succeeded in other better stories. Yet the final construction is profoundly hollow. The film lacks a central argumentative spine, a unifying purpose that would give these familiar elements meaning. It is nothing but a collection of cool scenes in desperate search of a story. We meet a disgraced general, but the weight of his past disgrace never informs his present choices in a meaningful way. We journey to a windswept planet to recruit a beast tamer, but the culture of that world has no thematic resonance with the hero's internal journey. Each sequence feels like an isolated, aesthetically pleasing diorama, disconnected from the one before and the one after. This story failed not because of a lack of imagination or budget, but because it was assembled from the outside in. Its creators began with a facade comprised of look, feel, and genre tropes, without first laying the foundation of a core thematic idea. And the result is a beautiful, expensive, and utterly vacant house. Finally then, there is the cautionary tale of Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. This film, a prequel set within the Harry Potter universe, follows the magical zoolist Newt Scamander, as he is drawn deeper into the conflict between his former teacher Albus Dumbledore and the rise of the dark wizard Gellert Grindelwald. The central failure here stems from a catastrophic confusion of purpose. This was not a narrative designed to tell a compelling character-driven story. This was a vehicle for intellectual property expansion. The film's primary function was to serve the Wizarding World brand, acting as a container for lore dumps, retroactive continuity changes, and nostalgic Easter eggs for the dedicated fanbase. This priority corrupts the very architecture of the plot. Characters make baffling decisions not because it serves their established personalities, but because the franchise required them to be in a certain place for a future installment. Entire subplots exist merely to reveal a shocking but emotionally unearned connection between a new character and a legacy name from the original books. Newt Scamander, the supposed protagonist, is frequently a passive observer in his own movie, shuffled from one location to the next while the machinations of the larger brand play out around him. The story feels less like a cohesive film and more like a series of disconnected expository cutscenes from a video game. It lacks a propulsive emotional core because its foundation is not a character's journey. Its foundation is a corporate strategy document for franchise maintenance. Now, in all three cases here, the facade was spectacular, but the structure was rotten from the start. And this brings us to a crucial trap that many aspiring writers fall into when they sense this very hollowness in their own work. They feel the lack of depth and recognize the narrative impotence, but they misdiagnose the cause. The instinct is to fix the problem by decorating the surface, and this is the false solution. A writer might take a standard farm boy becomes the chosen one plot and in an attempt to make it feel fresh, add a unique twist to the magic system. Perhaps magic is drawn from a character's own memories, causing them to forget parts of the past each time they cast a spell. Or they might try to subvert a minor trope, making the wise old mentor a treacherous manipulative figure. These are clever ideas on their own, and they can add flavor and texture to a story, but they are fundamentally cosmetic alterations. This approach is akin to rearranging the furniture in a house with a cracked foundation. Hanging a beautiful painting on the wall does nothing to address the structural rot that is causing the floor to sag. The hollowness in these stories does not come from a lack of originality in the magic or a failure to subvert a trope. It is an architectural problem, stemming from a foundation that was never built to support a meaningful emotional weight. Ultimately, the story still fails because its underlying skeleton was assembled from a market-driven template. So the fix is not to be more original with the surface details. It is to build from a different blueprint entirely. And so, we arrive at the heart of the matter. Before we can propose a cure, we must fairly confront the appeal of the disease. The ideology of right to market is seductive for a reason that is deeply tragically human. It promises a map through the wilderness of creative uncertainty. Imagine you are a writer with a full-time job, a family, and a mortgage. You possess a burning passion to create, but the terror of spending years pouring your soul into a novel that vanishes without a trace is paralyzing. In such a case, writing to the market doesn't appear before you as a cynical cash grab, but as a lifeline. It offers a clear, data-driven methodology. So this philosophy promises control in a career defined by chaos. Its intent, when viewed through the most generous lens, is to demystify success and make a creative living accessible to those who cannot afford to gamble. And that promise of clarity is the powerful, undeniable appeal of the Fiction Factory. But the long-term cost of this transactional approach is the slow creeping rot of the genre's soul. What we get is an ever-expanding ocean of narrative junk food. Most of these stories are engineered to be easily consumed, providing a momentary hit of satisfaction before being forgotten. Yet the far greater tragedy is what this ideology does to the writer. It is a form of institutionalized creative cowardice. This system actively trains you to suppress your most unique, most personal, and therefore most powerful ideas. Every writer has what I call a haunting feeling. It is that strange, inevitable image, that specific emotional ache, that bizarre what-if scenario that whispers to you in the quiet hours of the night. These haunting feelings are the raw ore of great art. They are the unique signal of your authorial voice. The right-to-market philosophy teaches you to dismiss this signal as commercially unviable noise. It encourages you to ask not what story haunts me, but what niche is trending. And so your most authentic impulses are systematically devalued and discarded in favor of what is marketable. This sickness, at its most advanced stage, forces the artist to become a mere assembler. Now you're no longer a creator forging a vision from the fire of your own experience, you are a line worker tasked with piecing together prefabricated components according to a schematic drawn by a market data. This is the slow, methodical erosion of the very thing that makes you an artist in the first place. And herein lies the critical turning point. The solution is not to reject the marketplace entirely or to abandon the principles of structure. Commerce and craft are essential tools for any professional writer. The fix ultimately requires a fundamental reorientation of the entire creative process. For too long, we have been taught to build our stories from the outside in. We begin with the market, the genre, the tropes, and the plot beats, hoping that by assembling these external pieces correctly, some form of meaning will spontaneously generate within. This is a recipe for hollow construction. We must learn to build from the inside out. The missing ingredient, the architectural core that must exist before the first word is written, is what I call the story promise. This is the unshakable foundation upon which every other element must rest. A story promise is the thesis statement of your novel. It is a clear, concise declaration of your narrative's meaning and purpose. Think of it as the central argumentative spine that gives the entire body of the story its shape and integrity. It transforms a simple plot summary into a profound statement of intent. For example, a plot summary might be, this is a story about a disgraced knight who must find a magical sword to defeat a dragon. That describes what happens. A story promise, however, articulates what it means and might sound like, this is a story about proving that true honor is not found in the accolades of society, but in the courage to do what is right when no one is watching. Do you see the difference? The first is a sequence of events. The second is a moral and emotional proposition. This single powerful sentence becomes your compass. It guides every decision you make, from the design of your magic system to the fatal flaw of your protagonist. By starting here with this core of meaning, we ensure that the final construction is not merely another disposable product, but a work of enduring power. Now, it is easy to throw theory at you, but let me now show you what actually happens when you build from the inside out. I want you to observe the breathtaking integrity of a story that is forged from a core of meaning. And for that, consider Ursula K. Le Guin's masterpiece, A Wizard of Earthsea. For those unfamiliar, this novel follows a gifted but arrogant young boy named Ged who is sent to a school for wizards. His pride leads him to perform a forbidden spell, unleashing a terrifying shadow beast that will hunt him across the world. A superficial analysis might categorize this as a simple wizard school story, an early precursor to a now saturated subgenre. This work, however, is a profound meditation on the nature of the self. Its story promise can be articulated like this. True mastery is found not in power over the world, but in the courage to confront and integrate one's own shadow. Notice how every single element of the narrative architecture is meticulously designed to serve and prove this promise. The magic system in the story is the primary tool of the theme. In Earthsea, power comes from knowing the true name of a thing. But to know its name is to have control over it. This concept immediately connects to identity and self-knowledge. Ged's journey is therefore not about learning more powerful spells, but about learning the true names of the world and ultimately of himself. And if we look at Le Guin's antagonist, it is a stroke of architectural genius, because the monster hunting Ged is not some external dark lord. It is a creature of shadow, formless and nameless, summoned into existence by Ged's own arrogance and lust for power. He is, quite literally, fighting a part of himself that he has refused to acknowledge. This antagonist cannot be defeated by a more powerful fireball or incantation. The very nature of the enemy dictates that the only possible resolution is one of acceptance and integration. And even the geography of the world serves this story promise. Earthsea is an immense archipelago, a vast sea dotted with countless islands. This setting forces Ged into a journey of profound isolation. His travels are not a grand campaign with an army at his back, but a desperate, lonely flight from one small community to the next. The physical landscape thus mirrors his internal state of alienation, reinforcing the theme that this is a battle he must ultimately face alone. Every cool element that a product-focused model might have assembled for market appeal exists here only to prove this central theme. This is a story as an artifact, built from a single unshakable core of meaning. But with that said, let me show you one more example, a modern one with the same architectural integrity. And the story I'm talking about is N.K. Jemisin's groundbreaking novel, The Fifth Season. The story is set in a supercontinent called the Stillness, a world racked by catastrophic climate events known as seasons, which can last for generations and threaten all life. Certain individuals, called orogenes, have the power to control seismic energy able to quell earthquakes or cause them. This power is feared, and orogenes are brutally oppressed, either killed as children or enslaved and controlled by a state-sanctioned order. Jemisin's work is a raw and unflinching exploration of systemic trauma. Its story promise explores how people, and by extension the entire world, survive after the end of everything, wrestling with the scars of inescapable oppression. Look at how the architecture is constructed with brutal and deliberate precision to serve such a promise. The magic system, Orogeny, is a direct metaphor for a trauma response. To control the immense power of the earth, an orogene must ruthlessly suppress their own emotions. A moment of anger or grief can unleash devastation, meaning their very survival depends on their ability to dissociate from their own feelings. This mechanic perfectly externalizes the internal reality of living with constant systemic trauma. Jemisin's narrative structure is perhaps her most powerful architectural choice. A significant portion of the book is written in a jarring second-person point of view, using you to address one of the main characters. And this is not a gimmick here. Its purpose is to force the reader directly into the dissociated psychological state of Esun, a woman whose child has just been murdered by her husband because the child showed signs of orogeny. The you perspective mirrors the way a person might psychologically distance themselves from an unbearable event, observing their own actions as if they were happening to someone else. And around all that, the world building then is an engine of conflict, designed to explore themes of oppression. The Society of the Stillness has developed a rigid caste system and a brutal social philosophy known as Stone Law, all designed to ensure survival during the long dark seasons. Every aspect of this culture, from its breeding programs for orogenes to its rigid social rules, is a direct result of the world's trauma, creating a society that perpetuates harm in the name of survival. There are no decorative elements here. Each piece of the world, from its fractured moon to its oppressive social structures, exists to deepen the exploration of how systems of powers are built upon and sustained by cycles of pain. The fifth season, like Earthsea, demonstrates that a story's most memorable and powerful elements are not random additions. They are the load-bearing pillars of a deliberate thematic structure, all pointing back to the foundational story promise. To build stories that possess this kind of enduring power, we must adopt a new set of architectural principles. And I'm not talking about rules or formulas, but a philosophy of construction that reorients the entire creative process away from replication and toward meaningful creation. Personally, I operate under what I call narrative architecture, and that philosophy comes with several key principles. The first principle is the one we have already identified as the missing ingredient overall. It begins with the story promise. Before you ever write a single word of your outline, before you design a continent or invent a single spell, you must define the soul of your story. Which leads us directly to the second principle, which redefines our understanding of plot itself. Principle 2 says, architect choice, not just plot. The right-to-market model obsesses over the beat sheet, a rigid structure dictating that specific external events must occur at precise percentages of the manuscript. Such an approach reduces storytelling to a checklist of happenings. A true story, however, is not a timeline of events that happen to a protagonist. Its power comes from a chain of irreversible transformative decisions that a protagonist makes. These crucial decisions are what I call emotional waypoints. They are the fundamental pillars of your character's arc and by extension the entire narrative structure. Instead of just planning what happens to your hero, you must design the impossible dilemmas they are forced to solve. These are the moments of profound pressure where their core beliefs are tested, where they must choose between two deeply held values or sacrifice a piece of their old self to become who they need to be. Think of Get at the climax of Earthsea. The plot event is he confronts the shadow. The emotional waypoint is his choice to stop running, turn, and embrace his own darkness, an act his younger arrogant self could never have contemplated. Or consider Essen in the 5th season. The plot is filled with her journey across a dying land, and the emotional waypoints are the brutal choices she makes to survive. Choices that challenge her own humanity and force her to reckon with the monster that oppression has made of her. So do not ask what happens next. Ask, what is the hardest possible choice my character could face right now? And how will that choice irrevocably prove who they are becoming? By architecting your story around these emotional waypoints, you ensure the plot is always driven by character, and the external journey is always a reflection of a powerful internal transformation. The events happening are merely the crucible. It's the choices that make the story. Finally then, we must redefine our relationship with the building blocks of our genre. That leads us to principle 3. See tropes as tools, not templates. You see, the ideology of the fiction factory treats tropes as prefabricated rooms to be assembled into a familiar house. You need a wise old mentor room, a dark lord room, a hidden prophecy room, and the result is a structure that is predictable and devoid of genuine surprise. A narrative that feels like it has been built from a kit. A narrative architect, though, understands that tropes are not templates to be copied. They are a shared language between the storyteller and the audience. Tropes are familiar forms, like the Chosen One or the quest for a magical sword, that come preloaded with a set of expectations. The architect's job is not to replicate those expectations blindly, but to use that shared language to create something new and powerful in service of the story promise. With a strong architectural foundation, you can wield these tools with intention. You can subvert a trope, setting up the expectation and then flipping it on its head. Imagine a Chosen One who, upon learning of their destiny, calmly says, "No," and walks away, forcing the world to find another solution. You can also combine tropes to create novelty. What if the Dark Lord is also the mentor, training the hero for a purpose far more insidious than simple conquest? Last but not least, you can deconstruct a trope, applying realistic consequences to a fantastical concept. As an example, what is the real economic and psychological fallout for a kingdom that has been saved by a farm boy, who now sits on the throne with no knowledge of statecraft? When your story is anchored by a powerful story promise and structured around transformative choices, tropes cease to be a crutch. They become one of your most effective instruments, because you can use the audience familiarity with these forms to surprise them, to challenge them, and to drive your thematic point home with devastating precision. These 3 principles, begin with the story promise, architect choice not plot, and see tropes as tools, form the foundation of a new blueprint. This is the cure for the sickness of the disposable story, because it represents a commitment to building narratives that matter, works that are designed not for fleeting consumption, but for permanent resonance. These principles of narrative architecture are not about rejecting commercial success. They are about earning it through the creation of undeniable meaning. Now, this is a choice that stands before every writer who sits down to an empty page today. Writers can consult the market data, reverse engineer the bestsellers, and build a competent, familiar, and ultimately forgettable structure. Or they can consult the haunting feelings in their own heart, excavate their story's true promise, and begin the difficult, terrifying, and sacred work of building something with actual meaning. And if you are ready to learn that craft, your work begins right now. Click here to watch this video next, where I will show you exactly how to build the emotional spine of your entire novel, your protagonist's complete transformation, using just 15 foundational scenes.